The 70s opened a brief window where studios were desperate enough to fund anything, and censors were still figuring out what the rules were. These are the films that slipped through that chaos, works so radical they got banned in their own era, and so uncompromising that even when modern Hollywood tries to remake them, they can't capture the audacity of the originals, existing in a strange sweet spot where they were simultaneously too dangerous for then and too honest for now. Carnal Knowledge triggered a Supreme Court case that nearly banned the film permanently while redefining how cinema could explore the emotional rot beneath the sexual revolution's promises. Jonathan and Sandy are college roommates whose decades-long pursuit of women reveals them to be emotionally stunted predators, their relationships becoming increasingly destructive until both men are isolated by their own inability to connect with anyone. Anne Margaret risked everything playing Bobby, a character who descends into suicidal depression due to her husband's emotional abuse, stripping away her glamour to expose truths about how the industry exploited women both on screen and off. In 1972, a theater manager in Albany, Georgia was arrested simply for showing the film, with the Georgia Supreme Court upholding the conviction until the U.S. Supreme Court reversed it in June 1974. This case became a watershed moment that created a safety net for future films to explore adult themes. But the 3-year legal battle demonstrated how easily local authorities could weaponize obscenity laws to suppress art that made audiences uncomfortable about their own behavior. Soldier Blue became the film that shattered the myth of American exceptionalism by depicting the cavalry as the true savages, creating a Vietnam allegory so visceral that it ended careers. Honus is a rigid cavalry private who survives a Cheyenne ambush and treks across the frontier with Cresta, a defiant woman who warns him about military cruelty, their journey culminating at a village where he witnesses his own army carry out a systematic massacre. The director hired real-life amputees from Mexico City as extras during the slaughter, using their physical conditions to create the illusion of soldiers hacking off limbs in real time, deliberately making the violence traumatizing rather than entertaining. While it was a massive hit in Great Britain, where audiences understood it as a searing indictment of American imperialism, it was a colossal failure in its home country, where the U.S. Army and conservative critics were outraged. A survivor of the Wounded Knee Massacre called the viewing experience the most horrifying of his life, and the film's bans in several countries demonstrated how deeply it threatened the good guy myth that sustained American militarism during Vietnam. Apocalypse Now weaponized the chaos of its own production to create a descent into madness, so authentic it nearly killed its lead actor, with the line between performance and reality collapsing entirely. Captain Willard travels up the river into Cambodia to terminate Colonel Kurtz, a decorated officer who has established a rogue cult deep in the jungle, with Willard witnessing surreal horror until he confronts Kurtz in a temple of skulls. The opening scene where Willard smashes a mirror and weeps in his own blood was Martin Sheen's actual breakdown, as the heavily intoxicated actor cut his hand and insisted on continuing smearing his real blood across the frame. At just 36, Sheen suffered a massive heart attack while filming and had to crawl a quarter-mile through the jungle to find help. So close to death, he was given last rites. Marlon Brando arrived vastly overweight and hadn't read the script despite being paid $1 million per week, creating the character of Kurtz as a shadowy philosopher, because the director had no choice but to hide Brando's condition. The film became the definitive statement on Vietnam by suggesting that the war didn't drive men insane, but simply revealed an insanity that was always there, with Kurtz representing the logical endpoint of American imperial power stripped of all moral justifications. Age of Consent became Helen Mirren's baptism by fire when Columbia Pictures panicked over the creepy optics of a 60-year-old man obsessing over what they called a child, despite Mirren being 22, leading to a 36-year erasure of the director's vision. Bradley is a weary New York artist who retreats to a remote Australian island where he meets Cora, a wild local girl who becomes his muse and model. Mirren spent significant portions of the film nude in skinny dipping and modeling sequences, but when the film left Australia, Columbia sliced out nearly 10 minutes to appease conservative censors. For 3 decades, the butchered version was the only one available until 2005, when Martin Scorsese found the original negatives and restored the banned scenes, finally revealing the serious character study Columbia had destroyed. The studio hated the original playful score so much, they replaced it entirely with a generic orchestral soundtrack to make the movie feel less lurid, transforming a meditation on artistic freedom into a shallow exploitation flick. The scandal followed Mirren for years, and 6 years later, a BBC host decided the best way to interview the Royal Shakespeare Company's leading actress about Lady Macbeth was to open by calling her a sex queen and asking about her equipment.
Do you find, in fact, that this, what could be best described as your equipment, in fact, hinders you, perhaps, in that pursuit?
I'd like you to explain what you mean by my equipment in
Well, people watching...
great detail.
Well, your physical attributes.
You mean my fingers?
No, I meant your...
Come on, spit it out.
I meant your figure.
My figure?
Rather than being flustered, her composed response made it impossible for audiences to ignore how absurd the question was, while she calmly dismantled him on live television.
I would hope that the performance and the play and the living relationship between all the people on the stage and all the people in the audience overcome such boring questions.
Scum became the film that the BBC banned before it ever aired, because it exposed the British juvenile detention system as a factory for creating more violent criminals rather than rehabilitating troubled youth. Carlin is a young offender sent to a brutal detention center where survival depends on being the top enforcer, with the facility run through a hierarchy of extreme violence culminating in a gang rape and a suicide that spark a bloody riot. The BBC's Director General banned the original 1977 television version, horrified by graphic depictions and fearing the film would incite actual prison riots. But director Alan Clark took the unprecedented step of refilming it as a theatrical movie that was even more violent. The most shocking moment is the slow suicide of an inmate named Davis, with the guards showing total indifference, a scene that led to questions in British Parliament, with politicians accusing the filmmakers of polluting young minds. The film's impact on its meager £250,000 budget created a public conversation about barbaric conditions that eventually led the British government to abolish the borstal system in 1982, demonstrating how a film banned for being too dangerous ended up forcing the exact systemic change that authorities feared it would inspire. Stalker became the film that literally killed its creators through toxic exposure, a production where the pursuit of spiritual truth came at the cost of physical survival. A mysterious zone has appeared where a room at its center grants deepest desires, with illegal stalkers guiding people through shifting supernatural traps as one takes a cynical writer and skeptical scientist on a philosophical journey through decaying terrain. The film was shot at 2 deserted hydroelectric plants in Estonia, where the water was heavily contaminated by chemical waste, with the crew spending months in stagnant poisonous conditions that years later led to the director, his wife, and the lead actor all dying of the exact same rare form of cancer. After spending an entire year filming, the director returned to Moscow to find 2,000 meters of negative improperly developed and what he believed was deliberate sabotage by Soviet officials who disliked his obscure style. The film became a meditation on faith in a godless world, with the zone functioning as a spiritual landscape where characters must confront whether achieving their deepest desires would destroy them, asking questions about human nature that Soviet authorities found dangerous because they suggested life under communism might not be worth living. Straw Dogs was effectively banned in the UK for nearly 3 decades because it dared to suggest that violence might be innate rather than learned, a thesis that terrified critics who saw it as fascist propaganda. David is a mild-mannered American mathematician who moves to rural Cornwall with his wife Amy, but escalating harassment reaches a breaking point when Amy is brutally raped by locals, and when a mentally disabled man takes refuge in their home, David's repressed rage explodes. The most controversial element is a rape sequence where the director portrayed an ambiguous response, suggesting trauma and involuntary arousal could coexist, refusing to provide moral clarity about what consent actually means. When submitted for video release in the 1980s, it was rejected under the Video Recordings Act for promoting harmful activity, not receiving certification until 2002. The film became a litmus test for whether audiences could separate depicting violence from endorsing it, with critics arguing the director's refusal to condemn his protagonist's savagery made the film itself an act of violence, while defenders insisted cinema had an obligation to explore the darkest corners of human nature without providing reassuring moral frameworks. The French Connection redefined the anti-hero by making its protagonist a brutal cop, whose violence is never condemned, with audiences left celebrating someone who breaks every rule in the book to get results. Jimmy Popeye Doyle and Buddy Cloudy Russo are 2 narcotics detectives who stumble upon a massive heroin smuggling ring from Marseille, with Doyle becoming increasingly obsessed as his tactics blur the line between law and criminal. The iconic car chase was filmed without permits in real New York traffic at speeds up to 90 miles per hour, with actual civilians diving out of the way, and even a real crash that the production simply paid off on the spot. Gene Hackman won an Academy Award playing Doyle, who was based on a real detective known for brutality and casual racism, but the liberal-minded actor found the dialogue so repulsive he repeatedly threatened to walk off until the director deliberately provoked him into real rage. The film arrived at the exact moment when Americans were losing faith in institutions, with Doyle representing a cop who gets results through methods that would be called criminal if done by anyone else, creating a moral void that modern Hollywood would struggle to navigate because audiences today expect clear heroes and villains. The Night Porter became the most controversial exploration of trauma bonding in cinema history, suggesting that concentration camp survivors and their captors could share a perverse intimacy that transcended good and evil. In 1957 Vienna, Max is a quiet night porter hiding his past as an SS officer. His anonymity shattered when Lucia, a survivor of the camp where he served, checks in and the pair retreats into a locked apartment to reenact their wartime roles. While filming on location, actor Dirk Bogarde stepped into public wearing an SS uniform and was swarmed by elderly Viennese who appeared genuinely nostalgic, with one woman falling to her knees to kiss his boots, while others began singing a forbidden Nazi anthem. This real-life encounter revealed that the film's exploration of lingering fascism wasn't fiction, but a reflection of a hidden reality that polite society refused to acknowledge. Charlotte Rampling accepted the role just 4 months after giving birth and channeled her exhaustion into portraying a woman spiritually broken by the camps, creating a performance so raw that critics dubbed the film Nazi chic. The film asked whether survival through submission created a bond stronger than morality, a question that decades later still makes audiences deeply uncomfortable about the compromises people make to survive.